extreme, it doesn't represent whatever we are. Now that's taken a long time to get there, right? If you remember Cronulla, if you remember, a number of points of conflict in the past where the police have just gone in with buttons. This time they were, I think, strategically handling it much better. That takes a lot of learning and a lot of courage and self-confidence of the local authorities. And I think what everyone would say about the Myanmar political structure, local authorities don't have much self-confidence.
Andrew, I was thinking about the influence of ASEAN in terms of Myanmar, and I was wondering whether in fact it's the Singaporean model, that is an authoritarian government which largely represents the ethnic majority, but recognises, if not protects, ethnic minorities. It could be actually part of the way forward. I'm not suggesting it should be, but it could be.
I don't know. I think the 1988 uprising and what has happened since then, Generation of 88, has so saturated the progressive sides of Myanmar society with the language of democracy that the Singapore model would, I don't think, work. No, people just wouldn't put up with it because, in a sense, that's what they had. Right? I mean, inefficient, under-resourced, and all the rest of it. It wasn't far off that in some ways. I mean, the numbers were different, so the content was different. But one of the things we found absolutely fascinating, it's a side issue, is when I was in Yangon, I had breakfast one morning with this guy. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Singapore." I said, "I've been coming here for 20 years selling agricultural equipment." He said, last, 3 weeks ago, I was at a thing in Singapore, and they're selling condos in Yangon, in Singapore. Right? So there's this huge land development thing going on with high-rise towers and everything, all planned, right, for the city, all much cheaper than you pay for it in Singapore, etc., etc. And that's a whole other thing. Because some of the Burmese I met were saying, we are really scared of what's about to happen. The cost of land is going through the roof. We can't possibly afford it. The whole, we are in danger of going the same way as Cambodia. Going from a military regime of horror to economic corruption on a scale that we can't even imagine, and impoverishment and all those sorts of things. So all of this stuff is in the mix at the moment.
Sandy first, then you.
Thank you, Professor. Myanmar is a member of the ASEAN recently. My question is, how does the ASEAN and its members feel the Myanmar and its problem, and what they do to help Myanmar?
This is a very interesting question. One of the first principle of ASEAN is do not get involved in anybody else's internal affairs, right? Because if you get involved in theirs, they might get involved in yours, right? So there is a very big concern about that. On the other hand, it's got to be said, there is a very strong commitment in ASEAN amongst the more progressive players to bring Myanmar into the community of modern nations. Now, they may not be too worried, in a sense, about some of the human rights issues, though from time to time they might, but they are very concerned about corruption, right? Because in terms of ASEAN economic development, you cannot afford to have an economically corrupt system in Myanmar, because you can't guarantee anything will actually be possible to develop it. So there's in a sense, ASEAN has an economic interest in trying to ensure that Myanmar is politically stable and economically kosher, if I can use that term about a Buddhist Muslim country.
I'm interested in your possible ways forward, particularly the second one on developing a national human rights code. And I just wonder, in particular in relation to what you've been saying about the ethnic minorities, how realistic would it be to develop a human rights code? I mean, is the government really open to it? Is it a bit pie in the sky? Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
No, I mean, there are a lot of NGOs, this is not particularly my idea. Many of the NGOs that are involved, international NGOs and the Myanmar NGOs, say we have to get this one right. We've got to work out what it means in our country to have a human rights code, and we have to police it and make sure it works, and we have to infuse the national culture with it. Because remember, for 60 years, this is a national culture, devoid at the official level of anything to do with human rights. So human rights has been an oppositional concept, and as we've discovered in many situations, oppositions come together when they're in opposition, and when they gain power, they split all over the place, because then they're trying to achieve their own ends. So that at the moment we're at this point where the ethnic nationalities are coming together in opposition to the government to try and resolve a lot of questions. No one knows what will happen if they're successful, and whether it will hang together, or how it might hang together after that point. But the discourses of human rights are very widely spread there, and the issues about human rights, the central one, security. Right? For many minorities, there's simply no security. Right? So, in a sense, human rights depends on having a functioning police force. They don't, what they've got is a militarised group of guys with guns, but who are not really a police force yet. So there's a whole thing about developing a police force that respects human rights and sees its role as actually securing the rights of everyone. Now, the government is making the right noises, I think, around that sort of stuff, but it's a big uphill push. Right? And I'm not saying, nobody knows what's going to happen, but at least it seems to me the direction that things are moving in is a damn sight better now than it was 2 years ago. At least they've pointed the machine somewhere like the right space, whether it's actually going, doing more than redding and neutral.
Might take one more question, if any. Yes, sir. Aung San Suu Kyi, where is the National League for Democracy placed now? How much do they embody a way forward?
Well, they clearly embody some of the way forward. Right? The National League for Democracy has a number of different pieces of it. So there's, if you like, the Burma piece, which is really part of it, and then there are a number of nationalities have their own leagues for democracy and so on. Sort of come together. There's quite a lot of tension in the league over representation and cronyism and all those sorts of things. There are big issues about how they're going to deal with non-Burmans, though the Muslim the Muslims in the sort of main part of the traditional Muslims are very much part of that story and very, very engaged with it and so on. The question of the Rohingyas, which is the one the League for Democracy has been most hesitant to make a statement about, really is a bigger issue than they know how to deal with, I would say, because they depend so much on, if you like, a sort of Buddhist and nationalism to give them their bounce against the military regime. They find it difficult to breach the wall around that on these sorts of issues. And I think that you're right to point to that now as the challenge. It's one of the challenges for them. They have to sort out how they're going to do that. Some of them have made very good statements. Some of them have been silent. But my guess is that there's so much now, there's so many in the sort of conflict resolution NGOs in Myanmar trying to work on these things, from the UK, from Denmark, from Europe, all over the place, that there is a lot of resource there that people can draw on to try and calm things out. But stuff like, stuff I mentioned, stuff like making sure the police do their job without fear or favour, all those things that we sometimes find difficult to get right here, is on their agenda.